The day my own family called me their biggest mistake, something inside me went quiet. Not angry. Not loud. Just quiet. The kind of quiet that settles deep in your chest and makes you realize that no one is coming to save you. I remember sitting there, listening to words that felt too heavy to belong to me, wondering how people who shared my blood could look at me like I was a problem they wished they could erase. That moment didn't explode my life all at once. It cracked it, slowly. And that crack changed everything. Growing up, I always felt like I was slightly out of place, like a chair pulled too close to the table. I tried to fit in, tried to be useful, tried to be good enough. But no matter what I did, it never seemed to land. My achievements were brushed aside, my dreams were called unrealistic, and my mistakes were magnified like proof that I never should have been there in the first place. I told myself it was normal family pressure, that love sometimes comes wrapped in harsh words. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. The night everything finally spilled out, it wasn't even supposed to be a fight. It started small. A comment. A sigh. Then another sentence that cut a little deeper. And before I knew it, years of bottled-up frustration came pouring out from both sides. That's when someone said it. Clear. Sure. Unfiltered. You're our biggest mistake. Not yelled. Not whispered. Just stated like a fact that had been waiting its turn. I laughed at first because it didn't feel real. I waited for someone to take it back, to say they didn't mean it, to soften it somehow. But no one did. The silence that followed was louder than the words themselves. In that silence, I realized I had been fighting for approval from people who had already decided my value. And in that moment, something shifted. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just stopped explaining myself. From the outside, nothing dramatic happened next. No bags packed in the middle of the night. No big goodbye. I didn't announce that I was leaving or make a scene. I simply started disappearing in small, quiet ways. I spoke less. I shared nothing. I stopped asking for permission to dream. And eventually one day I was gone. Not missing, just no longer present in the life that kept shrinking me. Starting over wasn't glamorous. There was no instant success story, no sudden glow-up montage. It was lonely. Painfully lonely. I lived in a small space where the walls felt closer at night, and the doubts were louder when everything else went quiet. I questioned myself constantly. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was a mistake. Maybe I wasn't built for more. But every time that thought crept in, another one followed right behind it. If I really was a mistake, why did I still feel this fire inside me? So I worked. Not to prove them wrong, at least not at first. I worked because it was the only thing that made the noise stop. Long hours, small wins, big failures, and lessons that hurt more than they helped. I failed more times than I can count, and there were nights I almost gave up, convinced that disappearing had been the wrong choice. But every morning I showed up again. Quietly. Consistently. Relentlessly. Over time, something unexpected happened. I stopped thinking about what my family would say if they could see me now. I stopped imagining their reactions, stopped replaying old conversations in my head. My life was no longer a response to their disappointment. It became my own story. I learned new skills, met people who didn't know my past, people who saw me for who I was becoming, not who I used to be in someone else's shadow. Money didn't come fast, but freedom did. The freedom to make decisions without fear of being mocked. The freedom to fail without being labeled a burden. The freedom to dream without being told to stay realistic. Piece by piece, I built something from nothing. A business. A system. A version of myself that didn't need permission to exist. And with every step forward, the distance between me and my old life grew wider. What my family never realized is that when they called me their biggest mistake, they gave me something I had never had before. Clarity. I no longer had to wonder where I stood. I no longer had to chase a love that came with conditions. Their words closed a door I'd been standing in front of my entire life. And once it closed, I finally turned around and saw how many other doors were waiting. Years passed. My name started to mean something in rooms where no one knew my last name or where I came from. Opportunities showed up where apologies never did. I built an empire not out of revenge but out of survival. Out of a quiet promise I made to myself the night I realized I was on my own. I promised that if I was going to be alone, I would at least be free. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about that moment. About how close I was to breaking instead of building. About how easy it would have been to disappear forever instead of disappearing to grow. And I wonder what would have happened if I had stayed, if I had kept trying to earn a place where I was never meant to belong. The truth is, this story isn't really about success, money, or proving anyone wrong. It's about what happens when the people who are supposed to love you push you to the edge, and you have to decide whether to fall or fly. I walked away without a word, carrying nothing but pain and potential. And what happened next is something no one, not even I, could have predicted. Because the real turning point, the moment everything truly changed, didn't happen when I left. It happened when the past came knocking again, and I had to decide whether to open the door or let it stay closed forever. When the past came knocking again, it didn't arrive with drama. No warning. No apology wrapped in a long message. Just a name lighting up my phone screen that I hadn't seen in years. For a moment, I stared at it like it belonged to someone else. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. What surprised me most was how distant it all felt, like watching an old movie I barely remembered being in. I didn't answer. Not right away. I let the phone go dark and sat there, letting memories surface on their own terms. I thought about the version of me they last saw. Broke. Confused. Quiet. I wondered if that's who they expected to find again. Someone easier to speak over. Someone who still needed approval. That thought alone made me realize how much had changed. Before everything fell apart, my family used to define who I was for me. I was the difficult one. The dreamer. The one who never followed the safe path. Every family gathering felt like a silent comparison I never signed up for. Cousins with stable jobs, siblings who fit the mold, and then me sitting there with ideas no one asked about and plans no one believed in. It wasn't cruelty all the time. Sometimes it was jokes. Sometimes concern disguised as advice. But it always landed the same way. Like a reminder that I didn't belong. When I left, I didn't just walk away from them. I walked away from that identity. But shedding it wasn't instant. For a long time, their voices lived in my head. Every risk I took came with their imagined reactions. Every failure felt like proof they were right. I worked twice as hard not just to succeed, but to silence those echoes. That's a part of the success journey no one talks about. The quiet mental battles that don't show up on social media. As the years passed, I built my life carefully. Not flashy. Not loud. I learned how to operate in silence. How to let results speak before I ever did. I surrounded myself with people who didn't know my family's story, people who judged me by my work ethic, not my past. That space gave me room to grow into myself. Slowly I stopped explaining where I came from. I focused on where I was going. Still, no matter how far you run, the past has a way of reminding you it exists. That missed call wasn't the first sign. Months earlier I'd noticed small things. Someone from my hometown viewing my profile. A distant relative liking a post, then quickly unliking it. At first I brushed it off. Curiosity happens. But deep down I sensed something shifting. Like pieces moving behind a curtain I couldn't see. The thing about building something from nothing is that it changes how people look at you. The same traits they once criticized suddenly become vision. The stubbornness they hated turns into drive. And the silence they ignored becomes mystery. I didn't change who I was. The results changed how it was interpreted. That realization was both empowering and unsettling. I thought about how my family used to talk about success. It was always linear. School, job, stability. Anything outside that path was considered risky, irresponsible. My choices didn't scare them because they were dangerous. They scared them because they were unfamiliar. And instead of trying to understand, they labeled me a mistake. It was easier than admitting they didn't know how to guide me. As my empire grew, so did the distance. Not just physically but emotionally. I had built walls without realizing it. Protective walls. Necessary ones. They kept me focused, but they also kept certain feelings locked away. Feelings I told myself I no longer needed. Forgiveness. Closure. Answers. I convinced myself I was done with all that. That success was enough. Then came another message. This time not a call. A simple line. We need to talk. No context. No explanation. Just that. I read it once, then again. Who was we? And why now? After all this time, after years of silence, after watching me disappear and reappear as someone they barely recognized, what suddenly made them want to talk? I didn't respond. Not because I was afraid, but because I didn't know what opening that door would cost me. Part of me wanted to ignore it forever, to protect the life I'd built from old wounds. Another part of me wondered if this was a test. Or a trap. Or something else entirely. The uncertainty was heavier than the anger ever was. I started reflecting on moments I hadn't allowed myself to feel back then. The birthdays I spent feeling invisible. The achievements that were met with silence. The constant pressure to be someone else. I realized I had buried those memories under work and ambition. Not healed them. Buried them. And buried things have a way of resurfacing when you least expect it. People often talk about a silent comeback like it's easy. Like you just disappear, grind, and come back successful. What they don't show is the loneliness. The self-doubt. The nights you question if cutting ties was worth it. I built an empire, yes, but I also built it alone. And now, the very people who pushed me to that edge were trying to step back into the picture. I wondered what they knew. Did they really understand what I'd built, or were they only seeing the surface? Did they regret what they said, or did they need something from me now? The lack of clarity kept my mind spinning. Every possibility carried its own weight. None of them felt simple. I caught myself rehearsing conversations that hadn't happened. Imagining apologies that might never come. Imagining confrontations I wasn't sure I wanted. I realized that even now, they still had the power to shake my balance. Not because I needed them, but because they were tied to a version of me I never fully said goodbye to. The next message came a few days later. Shorter. More direct. It's important. That word lingered. Important to who? Important why? I set my phone down and looked around at the life I'd built from scratch. The quiet mornings. The freedom. The control I never had before. I knew that whatever happened next could change things. Not my success but my peace. I hadn't disappeared just to be found again. I disappeared to become someone new. The question now wasn't whether I could face them. It was whether facing them would pull me back into a story I worked so hard to escape. And as I stood there, caught between who I was and who I used to be, I realized the real conflict wasn't with them at all. It was with the part of me that still wanted answers, and the part of me that feared what those answers might cost. I didn't respond to the messages immediately. Instead, I watched my empire grow around me, feeling both the pride of what I'd built and the unease of knowing my past was knocking on my door. The thing about success is that it doesn't erase old wounds, it only distracts you from them until someone or something stirs them back up. And these messages were doing exactly that. The first time I left my family, I thought I was running away from conflict. But now, years later, I realized I wasn't running from them. I was running from a version of myself that still needed their approval. That part of me still feared their judgment. And if I let it, that fear could undo everything I had worked for. I thought about my siblings, the ones who had always seemed to have life figured out. From the outside, their lives looked perfect. Careers, families, stability. But during those years of silence, I started hearing little things through the grapevine. Rumors. Passing comments. Hints that their perfect lives weren't as untouchable as they seemed. I remembered how they had dismissed me as a mistake, and I wondered if now, in some quiet corner of their minds, they were questioning the labels they had once placed on me. There was also my parents. The people who had made me feel small in ways I could never fully explain. I thought about the long evenings filled with cold silences, about the times I had tried to show them my dreams, only to be met with doubt and dismissal. Their words had been like tiny arrows aimed at my confidence, and every one had hit its mark. And now, the same people were trying to reach me again. The thought made something inside me tighten. Was it guilt? Was it curiosity? Or was it the lingering hope that maybe this time things could be different? But the messages weren't the only pressure. My empire, the one I had built from scratch, had its own demands. There were investors who depended on me, teams that relied on my decisions, and deadlines that wouldn't wait for personal drama. I realized that responding, or not responding, wasn't just about me anymore. My choices could ripple through people's lives who had nothing to do with my family history. That weight added another layer to the tension gnawing at me. I started noticing the subtle signs that my family had been watching. Social media posts that seemed carefully timed. Mentions from distant relatives who suddenly seemed curious about my life. Even my personal assistant, someone I trusted completely, had asked questions that I didn't expect. It was clear they weren't reaching out blindly, they were strategizing like they wanted to see how I would respond. That thought made me uneasy in a way I hadn't felt in years. Meanwhile, there was someone else who complicated everything. Alex. Alex had been a friend, then a partner in business, and eventually someone I trusted with parts of my past I had never shared with anyone else. Alex knew the truth about my family, the pain I carried, and the empire I had built as a silent rebellion against them. But even Alex had started noticing the signs. Subtle inquiries, strange contacts, and rumors that didn't quite add up. Alex was worried. And when Alex was worried, I knew it meant the situation was more serious than I was letting myself admit. At the same time, I had started to see cracks in my own armor. I prided myself on staying detached from my past, but there were moments when I felt the old hurt bubbling up. A phrase, a tone of voice, a familiar gesture, it was enough to pull me back to those nights when I felt invisible, when I was told I was the family's biggest mistake. I didn't like that part of myself. I had worked so hard to leave it behind, and now it was surfacing in ways I couldn't control. And then there were the whispers of opportunity, or maybe it was danger. Certain people, business contacts from my old city, had started reaching out. Some were friendly. Some were curious. And some, I suspected, were trying to exploit the tension between me and my family. It became clear that my family's decision to reach out could have consequences far beyond the personal. It could affect my reputation, my finances, even the trust one had built with my team. Every interaction had to be measured, calculated, guarded. But every day the pressure increased. I realized that the empire I had built was no longer just my sanctuary. It had become a stage where my past and present collided. Every deal I closed, every meeting I led, every decision I made carried with it the silent threat of being disrupted by the family I had left behind. It was ironic. I had worked so hard to escape their influence, only to find that influence creeping back in through channels I couldn't ignore. At the same time, I started to wonder what they really wanted. Was it reconciliation? An apology? Money? Control? Or something I couldn't even see yet? The uncertainty gnawed at me. If I reached out first, I risked appearing vulnerable, as if I needed their approval after all these years. If I didn't respond, I risked burning bridges that might hold secrets, resources, or truths I wasn't ready to face. Every option carried danger, and I felt like I was walking a tightrope over a void I couldn't see. To complicate matters, old memories started surfacing. Moments I had buried deep because they were too painful to think about. The quiet mornings alone, feeling like I was invisible. The long nights wondering if anyone in my family would ever truly see me. The dismissive comments that had followed me into adulthood, shaping the way I approached relationships and trust. These memories were no longer just background noise. They were part of the conflict itself. I realized that I couldn't just navigate the present without confronting the past. Even my closest friends started noticing the change in me. They saw the tension, the hesitation, the brief moments when my calm facade cracked. I tried to explain it away, but they weren't convinced. Some even suggested that maybe I was overthinking, that perhaps it wasn't worth letting old wounds disrupt my life. But I knew better. I could feel that whatever was coming next wouldn't be something I could ignore. And then there was the nagging thought I couldn't shake. What if this wasn't about them at all? What if their attempt to contact me was just the surface of a much bigger problem? A hidden agenda? Something I couldn't see coming, something that could undo all the careful planning I had done over the years? The thought made me sleep poorly, made me second-guess even simple decisions, and made every message, every call, every email feel like a potential trap. In the midst of all this, I realized I was no longer just facing a family that had rejected me. I was facing myself, every insecurity, every doubt, every fear that had driven me to disappear in the first place. And I knew that the real conflict wasn't just external, it was internal. Could I stay true to who I had become while confronting the people who had shaped the person I used to be? Could I protect everything I had built without losing myself to the past? And so I waited. I watched. I calculated. Every small clue, every subtle hint, every unexplained message became a piece of a puzzle I didn't yet understand. And as the tension built, I realized one terrifying truth. The story wasn't just about proving I wasn't a mistake anymore. It was about surviving the consequences of leaving, and discovering that some mistakes, whether theirs or mine, never really stay buried. The messages kept coming. The whispers kept spreading. The old wounds kept aching. And somewhere deep down, I knew that the next step I took, whether to open the door or keep it closed, would change everything. Not just my life, but the fragile balance I had built, the empire I had fought for, and the person I had worked so hard to become. And I wasn't ready to take that step yet. But I could feel the moment approaching, like the calm before a storm that had been brewing for years. A storm that would test everything I thought I knew about family, loyalty, and myself. A storm that might finally answer questions I had been avoiding, or create new ones I wasn't sure I wanted to face. Because sometimes disappearing isn't the end. Sometimes it's just the beginning. And whatever was coming next, I knew it would be bigger, more complicated, and more dangerous than I could have ever imagined. The days that followed were tense in a way I hadn't felt in years. Every notification on my phone made my chest tighten. Every unfamiliar number, every email from an unknown address, felt like a step closer to a confrontation I wasn't sure I was ready for. I kept replaying the last few messages in my head, trying to read between the lines, but the ambiguity was maddening. Whoever was behind it knew exactly how to pull me in without revealing their intentions. Even in the office where I usually felt untouchable, I felt on edge. My team noticed subtle changes in my demeanor, slightly distracted, unusually quiet, more guarded than normal. They asked if everything was okay, but I waved it off with a smile. I couldn't tell them that the people who had once dismissed me as a mistake were trying to reach me after all these years. I couldn't tell them that the quiet life I had fought so hard to build was suddenly under threat. I started seeing patterns in their attempts to contact me, small things I hadn't noticed before. Posts on social media that seemed timed to coincide with big deals I had closed. Casual mentions from mutual acquaintances who seemed just a little too curious. Even some of my old mentors, people I trusted, had reached out under vague pretenses. It became clear that this wasn't a simple attempt at reconciliation. Something bigger was happening, something that could reach into every corner of my life if I let it. I found myself haunted by memories of the life I left behind. The years of feeling unseen, of being called a mistake. The late nights spent crying silently, wondering why the people who were supposed to love me most could make me feel so small. Those memories were painful, but now they carried a new weight. They weren't just reminders of old wounds, they were warnings of what could happen if I let my guard down. Alex noticed my restlessness. "You're on edge," Alex said one evening after I had spent hours pacing the office. "Something's coming, isn't it?" I didn't answer at first. Part of me wanted to deny it, to pretend that I was in control. But deep down I knew Alex was right. "It's complicated," I finally said. "It's not just them. It's everything. The past. The present. The empire I've built. It's all tied together and I don't know which way it's going to hit first." Alex didn't push. Instead, they watched me with that quiet, steady presence that always grounded me. But even their calm couldn't ease the knot in my stomach. I knew that whatever was coming wasn't going to be subtle. It wasn't going to be a simple conversation or a quick message. It was going to force me to face everything I had buried, every doubt, every fear, every decision I had made to survive. The tension escalated when I received an unexpected visitor at my office. No name, no explanation, just someone waiting quietly in the corner as I worked. I didn't recognize the face at first, but the moment I did, my heart sank. This person wasn't just a messenger, they were a link to everything I had tried to leave behind. They didn't speak immediately, but the silence between us was heavy, almost unbearable. Every second felt like a countdown to something I couldn't predict. I realized then that the conflict wasn't just about my family or my past anymore. It was about control, who had it, who wanted it, and how much of my life could be touched by forces I had thought were long gone. The empire I had built, the careful life I had constructed, was suddenly vulnerable in ways I hadn't imagined. Every choice I made now felt like it carried double weight, my own future and the ripple effects it could have on everything I had fought for. Sleep became nearly impossible. I started waking in the middle of the night, heart racing, mind spinning with possibilities. What if this was a trap? What if they wanted to humiliate me, to prove that their judgment of me as a mistake was right all along? Or worse, what if it forced me to choose between my past and everything I had created in the present? The uncertainty was maddening. I had spent years building stability and freedom, and now both were at risk, dangling just out of reach. I thought about my team, about Alex, about the people who relied on me. If I faltered now, the consequences wouldn't just be personal, they would ripple outward. Every success I had worked for, every investment, every decision that had taken me years to perfect, could be jeopardized. That thought was more terrifying than any confrontation with my family could ever be. I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for everyone who had trusted me, everyone who had believed in me when I still doubted myself. And then came the cryptic message that changed everything. No name, no explanation, just a single line. "Tonight, everything changes. Be ready." I stared at it for what felt like hours. The simplicity of the message made it all the more terrifying. Whoever sent it knew exactly how to provoke me, how to make me feel both anticipation and dread. It wasn't a threat, not exactly. But it carried the weight of inevitability. Something was coming and I had no idea whether I would be ready for it, or if readiness even mattered. I spent the rest of the day moving through a fog of tension. Meetings felt unreal, phone calls felt like distractions, and every minor decision carried a sense of urgency that I couldn't shake. I thought about the quiet disappearance that had once saved me, the distance I had put between myself and the people who called me a mistake. I wondered if disappearing again could save me, or if this time the past would find a way to reach in no matter what. Even Alex noticed the change. "You're holding back," they said quietly. "You're trying to protect something, or someone. But you can't do it alone." I wanted to tell them everything, but I couldn't. Some things weren't just mine to share. Some things had to be faced in the moment, raw and unfiltered. I had to see what this was, understand it, and survive it on my own terms. As evening fell, I sat alone in my office, the city lights stretching out below me. My phone buzzed again, but I didn't pick it up. I couldn't. Not yet. I could feel the tension building like a storm ready to break. Every instinct in my body screamed that something monumental was about to happen, something that would test everything I had fought for, my empire, my freedom, and my sense of self. And in that moment, I realized the truth I had been avoiding for years. This wasn't just about being seen or acknowledged. It wasn't about proving anything to the people who once called me a mistake. This was about confronting the storm I had been running for my entire life. The collision of past and present, the reckoning of choices, and the challenge of holding on to who I had become when everything I had built was suddenly at risk. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if I would survive unscathed, if I would walk away stronger, or if the storm would tear through everything I had created. All I knew was that tonight, everything was about to change. And no amount of preparation could tell me whether I was ready, or whether the people from my past had come to offer closure, or to unleash chaos that I couldn't control. I looked at the clock. Minutes ticked by, each one heavier than the last. The empire I had built, the life I had fought to protect, the silence I had relied on to become myself, it was all about to be tested. And for the first time in years, I felt a mix of fear and anticipation that left me completely uncertain of what the night would bring. Because some confrontations, I realized, aren't about winning. They're about surviving long enough to face the truth. And the truth waiting for me tonight promised to be more intense, more complicated, and more dangerous than anything I had ever imagined. The night was quiet at first, almost too quiet, and that's when I sensed it, the feeling that something was shifting, something I hadn't accounted for. I had been preparing myself for my family to appear, for confrontations and explanations, maybe even apologies. But what I wasn't prepared for was the subtle hint that someone else had stepped into the picture, someone I hadn't seen coming. It started with a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer it, but instinct told me to pick up. A calm voice greeted me, one that carried neither warmth nor anger, just a chilling clarity. "I know everything about you," the voice said. "And I know what your family has been hiding. You don't know the half of it." My grip tightened on the phone. "Who is this?" I asked, trying to mask the unease creeping up my spine. "You'll see soon enough," the voice replied before the line went dead. My mind raced. For years I had thought the conflict was just with my family, the words, the judgment, the cold dismissal. But now, this mysterious caller implied that the conflict was bigger than I had ever imagined. Someone else had been pulling strings from the shadows, someone who had a deeper knowledge of my life and my family's secrets. I replayed the conversation over and over in my mind. The words, "You don't know the half of it," echoed in the silence of my office. For the first time, I realized the possibility that my family's reach might not just be personal, it could affect everything I had worked so hard to build. My empire, my reputation, even my relationships could be at risk. And the thought was terrifying because this wasn't a threat I could predict or control. That same night, another strange event shook me. A package appeared at my doorstep, unmarked, with no return address. I hesitated before opening it. Inside, I found a single photograph. It was an image from my childhood, one I hadn't seen in years, showing me with my parents, but someone was missing. Someone I had trusted, someone who I thought was gone from my life entirely. And written on the back in handwriting I didn't recognize were the words, "You were never the biggest mistake, but you might be the key." I froze. The phrase, "the key," set off a cascade of questions in my mind. A key to what? To the truth about my family? To secrets that could unravel everything? Or something even more dangerous, something that could destroy the empire I had built in silence? My chest tightened. The stakes had just shifted. What I thought was a personal conflict was now turning into something much larger, something I could no longer ignore. Alex noticed my unease the next morning. "You've been tense all night," Alex said, sitting across from me in the office. "Talk to me. What's going on?" I hesitated. Part of me wanted to shield them from this new threat, to keep the empire intact without dragging anyone else into the chaos. But I couldn't hide the photograph from Alex. When I showed it, their eyes widened. "Where did this come from?" they asked, the worry clear in their voice. "I don't know," I admitted. "But it changes everything. This isn't just about my family anymore. Someone else is involved. Someone who knows more than we do." Alex leaned back, clearly processing the gravity of the situation. "If someone else has been pulling strings all this time, that means the confrontation we've been preparing for isn't the real problem. The real problem is bigger and it's closer than you think." And they were right. The moment the thought hit me, a cold realization washed over me. I had been preparing for the wrong battle all along. I had been bracing for my family's judgment, their attempts to manipulate or reconcile, but I hadn't considered the hidden forces in the background, the secret motives that could strike when I least expected. Hours later, I started noticing patterns I had ignored before. Strange emails from anonymous addresses, subtle financial movements in my accounts, rumors in industry circles that seemed coordinated, almost orchestrated. Every piece seemed disconnected on the surface, but in my gut, I knew it was connected. Someone was systematically testing me, probing for weaknesses, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And the scary part? I didn't know why. I thought back to the cryptic message from my family, "Tonight, everything changes." What if tonight wasn't about them at all? What if it was about the shadow behind them, the unknown force that had been moving silently while I focused on surviving my family's judgment? The thought made my pulse spike. The empire I had built, the life I had painstakingly created in silence, was now caught in a web of unknown intentions. That night I stayed up, pacing, checking my phone, analyzing every message, every post, every signal. I felt like a character in a story I couldn't control, like someone had written a script and left me to improvise. The tension was unbearable, the sense of anticipation electric. Every sound outside, every knock, every notification could be the beginning of something catastrophic. As the hours crept forward, I realized I was facing a truth I hadn't been ready for. Survival now meant uncovering the bigger plot, the hidden players who had influenced my life long before I left. It wasn't just about proving I wasn't a mistake anymore. It was about protecting the empire I had built, exposing the secrets I hadn't seen coming, and preparing for a confrontation far more dangerous than I could have imagined. And just when I thought the night couldn't get any more tense, another message arrived on my phone. This one was different. It had a photo attached, a recent image of me taken without my knowledge. I was alone in the office, yet someone had been watching. Written across the image were the words, "The choice isn't yours alone. Decide wisely." The cold rush of fear hit me instantly. Someone was not just observing me, they were controlling the narrative. They knew my moves, my habits, and possibly even my vulnerabilities. The stakes were no longer about old family wounds or my past disappearing act. The stakes were about strategy, survival, and timing. I looked around my office, the city lights flickering below, and felt the weight of everything pressing down. My family's judgment had been painful, but it had also been predictable. This unknown force was unpredictable, intelligent, and patient. And I knew deep in my gut that the next few hours could determine everything. My empire, my freedom, and the person I had fought so hard to become. I realized the storm wasn't just coming. It had already arrived. And I was standing right in the middle of it, unsure who the real enemy was, unsure who I could trust, and unsure if I had the strength to face what was coming next. The tension was unbearable. Every minute stretched longer, every thought spiraled faster, and the weight of the unknown pressed on me from every angle. Tonight, I understood, would be a turning point, not just in my life but in the story of everything I had fought to survive and everything I had yet to uncover. Because some battles, I realized, aren't just about confronting the past. They're about surviving a truth you never saw coming, and knowing that once it's revealed, nothing can ever be the same. And in that moment, I knew, the real game had just begun. The night had stretched into a tense, almost unbearable silence. Every sound felt amplified, the hum of the office air conditioning, the faint footsteps in the hall, the distant city sirens. I sat at my desk, staring at the phone with the photo that had shaken me to my core. I knew I had to act. The choice wasn't just about responding, it was about taking control before someone else forced my hand. I decided to trace the source of the messages. Every email, every text, every anonymous tip had a digital trail. It took hours, but I persisted, driven by a mixture of fear, determination, and the need to protect everything I had built. By the early morning, I had discovered something shocking. The messages, the photo, the surveillance, it was all coordinated not by my family but by someone I had trusted years ago. Someone I had never suspected, Alex. My heart stopped. Alex, the person I had confided in, the one who had always seemed steady and loyal, had been orchestrating the entire chain of events. At first, I couldn't comprehend it. Why would Alex betray me after everything? But as I dug deeper, the pattern became clear. Alex hadn't wanted to destroy me, they had wanted to test me, push me to my limits, to see if I could truly survive without relying on anyone. Every threat, every mysterious message, every hidden photo was part of a plan to prepare me for the ultimate decision I was about to face. Before I could confront Alex, my family appeared at my office building. Not together, not in anger, but each arriving silently, almost cautiously as if they too were unsure how this would unfold. My parents, my siblings, they had followed the chaos too, piecing together the hints and whispers they had ignored for years. But now, standing before me, I realized they were not my enemies. They had been pulled into this storm alongside me, manipulated, waiting to see how I would respond. I stood up slowly, facing them. "I know everything," I said, my voice steady but firm. "I know the games, the messages, the photos. I know who's been behind it all." My family's faces shifted between confusion and fear. "Alex," I said, pointing toward the doorway, where Alex had finally stepped forward, their calm demeanor intact. Alex nodded. "It's true," they said quietly. "I did this, not to hurt you but to push you. To make sure you were ready for everything life could throw at you. You've built something incredible, but the world isn't gentle. You needed to see how strong you really are." It hit me all at once. The stakes, the tests, the tension. Every fear I had felt, every sleepless night, every sense of being watched. It had been a crucible. I had been forced to confront my past, my family, my trust, and my own resilience. And I had survived. I had not only protected my empire but also realized that strength wasn't about avoiding pain. It was about facing it, understanding it, and using it to grow. My family stepped closer, a mix of relief and apprehension on their faces. "We were wrong," my father said, his voice softer than I had ever heard. "We judged you unfairly. We never saw the fire in you. You weren't a mistake." My siblings echoed the sentiment, each voice shaking with sincerity. For the first time in years, I felt a strange sense of closure. Not perfect, not erased, but real. And yet, just as I was beginning to process the relief, Alex stepped aside, holding another envelope. I took it cautiously, and inside was a single piece of paper. A letter, handwritten, with a message I couldn't have anticipated. "The real empire isn't what you've built. It's who you've become. But now the world will know your name, and they will want more than what you can give. Are you ready?" My heart raced. The twist hit me like a thunderclap. Surviving this storm was not the end. It was just the beginning. The personal conflicts, the tests of trust, the reconciliation with my family, they had all been preparation. The true challenge, the one that would push me beyond anything I had faced so far, was still ahead. I looked around the room at my family, at Alex, at the life I had built in silence. I realized that for the first time, I was ready to face not just the shadows of my past, but the unknown forces of the future. I had emerged from being the biggest mistake, into someone unstoppable, someone capable of confronting any challenge. But the final twist, the one the world had yet to throw at me, was already here, waiting. And I smiled because for the first time I understood, disappearing had not been the end. It had been the start of becoming someone no one, including my family, myself, or even Alex, could ever underestimate again. The storm wasn't over. It was only evolving. And I was ready. The days after that night were surreal. I felt a strange mix of exhaustion, relief, and anticipation, like waking from a long storm that had left the air heavy but clear. Alex and I sat down together to go through everything, the messages, the emails, the surveillance, the cryptic photos. I realized how much had been orchestrated, not to control me, but to show me what I was capable of when every distraction and fear was stripped away. It was brutal, yes, but it was also a lesson I didn't know I needed. My family slowly became part of the picture, not as the people who had once called me a mistake, but as humans who had been blind to my potential. Conversations that had been impossible for years became possible. My parents apologized, not just in words but in ways that mattered. They asked questions, listened to my perspective, and finally acknowledged that their judgment had hurt me. It wasn't instant forgiveness and it wasn't perfect, but it was real. My siblings took their own time. Some were hesitant, some proud, some still cautious. But one by one, they began to see me as the person I had built myself into, not the mistake they once believed I was. I realized the lesson wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about reclaiming my own narrative. Their acceptance was a gift, but the true victory was the strength I had found within myself. I also had to confront the consequences of the chaos Alex had orchestrated. It had exposed vulnerabilities in my empire, moments where my decisions were tested under extreme pressure. But instead of breaking me, it sharpened me. I learned to anticipate challenges, to trust my instincts, and to rely on the systems and people I had built around me. My empire wasn't just a collection of businesses or financial success. It was a reflection of resilience, strategy, and vision. Alex and I had long talks about trust and boundaries. The revelation of their role in the events could have destroyed our partnership, but it didn't. We were able to confront the fear, the anger, and the shock, and instead we turned it into a deeper understanding of each other. It was strange to think that the person who had pushed me to the edge was also the one who helped me realize my full potential. The anonymous letters and messages stopped, but the lessons they carried stayed with me. I realized that life would always throw unexpected challenges, tests of character, and forces beyond my control. Success wasn't about avoiding danger or avoiding conflict. It was about facing it head-on, making decisions with clarity, and never losing sight of who you were, no matter what others thought. I also took time to reflect on my own journey. Disappearing had been my survival mechanism, but building my empire had been my declaration of independence. I had created a life defined by my own choices, not by the judgment or approval of anyone else. And in doing so, I realized that being called a mistake had never been the truth. It had been someone else's limited perspective. My life now proved what I had always suspected, that my worth was never determined by others. Family gatherings became different. They weren't perfect. There were moments of awkwardness, lingering doubts, and old habits creeping in. But they were also filled with laughter, curiosity, and connection. I saw my parents and siblings in a new light, and I realized that people could change when they wanted to. I also realized that relationships weren't about erasing the past. They were about learning, rebuilding, and moving forward with honesty. Business continued to grow, but it felt different now. I made decisions with more confidence, knowing I had faced both external threats and internal doubts. My team noticed the shift. I was more decisive, more present, and more willing to share the vision of what we were building. Alex remained my trusted partner, but with clearer boundaries and mutual respect that had been tested in fire and survived. I thought often about that night when everything changed, the messages, the photos, the unknown voice, and the revelation about Alex. It had felt like the climax of my story, the moment where everything could have been lost. But in hindsight, I realized it was the turning point. The storm didn't just challenge me, it transformed me. It reminded me that strength comes from within, that survival isn't passive, and that the people who matter will rise with you, while others fade into the background. There were moments of quiet reflection too. I walked through the city at night, thinking about the journey from being dismissed as a mistake to becoming someone who could face the world without fear. I remembered the long nights of loneliness, the doubts, the self-questioning, and the despair. And I realized that each of those moments had been necessary. They had built the foundation for the resilience I now carried, the clarity I now had, and the empire I had created. As I looked back, I understood the deeper lesson. Life doesn't owe you validation, and people don't have to recognize your worth for it to exist. The real power comes from owning your story, embracing your mistakes as part of your growth, and creating a life that reflects your own values and vision. I had learned to trust myself above all else, and that trust had carried me through the darkest nights to emerge stronger than I had ever imagined. And yet, even as I embraced this resolution, the final twist reminded me that life never stops testing you. One morning, an unexpected email appeared in my inbox. It was from a person I had thought was long gone from my life, someone who had silently watched the empire grow from a distance. The message was simple: "You're stronger than you know, but be ready. The world isn't done with you yet." I smiled, a mix of exhaustion and anticipation washing over me. The challenges I had faced, the tests I had survived, and the lessons I had learned had prepared me for this moment. I wasn't the biggest mistake anymore. I was someone who had turned pain into power, doubt into determination, and disappearance into transformation. The story of my past, my family, and the empire I built had reached a conclusion. But life, as it always does, hinted that new chapters were waiting. I had faced judgment, betrayal, fear, and uncertainty, and I had emerged with clarity, strength, and purpose. I had learned that the world would always test me, but I was capable of rising every time, stronger and wiser. And as I sat in my office, looking out at the city lights, I felt a quiet confidence. I knew the future would bring challenges, but I also knew that no matter what came next, I was ready. I had faced the worst, discovered the truth, reclaimed my life, and learned that the greatest victories come not from approval, but from perseverance, courage, and belief in yourself. In the end, being called a mistake had not defined me. It had propelled me. Disappearing had not ended my story, it had allowed it to begin. And now, with the lessons of the past, the strength of the present, and the promise of the future, I was prepared for whatever came next. Because surviving, building, and rising from the ashes of judgment had taught me the most important truth. Your worth is determined by no one but you, and your story is always yours to write. And with that, I finally felt at peace, ready to face the world, ready to grow, and ready to embrace the life I had fought so hard to create. The past had shaped me, the challenges had strengthened me, and the future awaited with possibilities I could now meet on my own terms. I had disappeared, I had survived, and I had built an empire, but more importantly, I had built myself.